Imagine a deadline in one of the world's most volatile conflict zones. A clock ticking down not toward peace, but toward either disarmament or a renewed war. Israel has given Hamas 60 days to lay down its weapons or face a full-scale military mission from the IDF. What does this ultimatum mean for Gaza, for the region, and for the fragile ceasefire that has barely held? Today, we're breaking down that deadline, the politics behind it, the risks involved, and why the world is watching every moment of this countdown. At a conference in Jerusalem this week, Israel's cabinet secretary Yossi Fuchs stated plainly, Hamas will have 60 days to disarm, including giving up weapons like AK-47 rifles, or the Israeli Defense Forces (IDF) will be forced to complete the mission themselves. Unlike vague political talk, this was a clear ultimatum with a ticking clock. But why now? To understand that, we need to rewind and look at the current situation on the ground. In October 2025, a fragile ceasefire was reached between Israel and Hamas after years of intense conflict. On paper, the ceasefire called for a reduction in violence, the release of hostages, some humanitarian access. But crucially, Hamas was expected to disarm. Yet months later, that part of the deal remains deeply unresolved. Israeli officials estimate that Hamas still holds tens of thousands of weapons, from rifles to explosives, and retains significant military capabilities beneath Gaza. For Israel, disarmament is not just about the ceasefire. It's about long-term security. Israeli leaders believe that as long as Hamas retains weapons and military infrastructure, including underground tunnels, the risk of deadly attacks remains. These fears are rooted in recent conflict history, especially the horrific October 7 attack, which Israel calls one of the deadliest assaults on its civilians in decades. Israeli officials argue that weapons like AK-47s were used in that massacre. From Israel's perspective, asking Hamas to disarm is not negotiable, it's existential. But disarmament is far easier said than done. Hamas has never been a conventional military force. Its armed wing operates not just in open battlefields, but inside towns, underground, and among civilians. That makes verification of disarmament extraordinarily difficult. Even now, there are reports that Hamas is quietly stockpiling light weaponry among civilians to safeguard its arsenal. From Hamas's point of view, giving up weapons is not just a military decision, it's a political one. For them, weapons symbolize not just defense but resistance and are integral to their identity and political legitimacy. So demands to disarm are interpreted as attempts to eliminate their power completely, and potentially erase their role in Palestinian governance. This 60-day deadline was not declared in isolation. According to reports, it comes after discussions between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump and Netanyahu agreed to give Hamas this window as part of a broader U.S.-backed peace plan, but the underlying message was clear. Disarmament within 60 days or Israel will act. Trump even warned there would be hell to pay if Hamas did not comply. However, international pressure is mixed. Some global actors support demilitarization and reconstruction efforts, while others argue that without addressing Palestinian political and humanitarian concerns, violence will simply return. This leaves the United States and Israel walking a diplomatic tightrope. Here where things get serious. If Hamas doesn't disarm in the next 60 days, Israeli officials have made it clear. The IDF will resume its military operation to force that disarmament. This could mean renewed ground offensives, expanded airstrikes, increased pressure in densely populated urban zones, further destruction of infrastructure, high civilian casualties. Already, sporadic violence has continued despite the ceasefire, with recent Israeli airstrikes targeting militant positions in Gaza. Any renewed large-scale military campaign would worsen humanitarian suffering across Gaza. International agencies warn that even limited conflict intensification could push conditions into full disaster. Remember, behind every geopolitical ultimatum are real lives. Families in Gaza have lived through years of siege, war, displacement, and economic collapse. Aid deliveries have been limited and often politicized. Even under the current ceasefire regime, the needs remain enormous. At the same time, Israeli communities near the Gaza border live with the psychological trauma of rocket attacks and fear of renewed conflict. For both sides, the 60-day deadline is not just a political flashpoint, it's a human flashpoint. One of the key sticking points in the disarmament debate is the vast underground tunnel system that runs beneath Gaza. These tunnels have served multiple purposes: military movement and storage, smuggling, shelter for fighters, strategic depth against air and ground operations. Israeli officials view these tunnels as part of Hamas's active warfighting capacity. Destroying them is seen not just as dismantling infrastructure, but eliminating a core operational advantage. But tunnels are hard to detect, expensive to destroy, and politically sensitive when they run under civilian neighborhoods. Even if Hamas were to partially disarm, the broader conflict dynamics do not disappear. A long-term peace would require addressing Palestinian governance and autonomy, reconstruction financing, refugee displacement, security guarantees for both Israelis and Palestinians, regional political interests. Without progress on these fronts, a 60-day ultimatum could simply be a prelude to another violent cycle. International mediators, from Arab states to Western powers, continue pushing for negotiations, but gaps remain wide and trust is fragile. So, as the countdown ticks toward this 60-day deadline, here are the key developments to follow. 1. Has Hamas begun actual disarmament, not just rhetoric? 2. Are weapons stockpiles being surrendered or moved? 3. Will the U.S. and international allies step up monitoring or mediation? 4. Does the IDF expand operations before the deadline expires? 5. How do Palestinian civilians and humanitarian agencies respond? Each of these will influence whether this deadline is remembered as a breakthrough or the spark for the next chapter of violence. In the end, 60 days is more than a number, it's a test. A test of whether diplomatic pressure can change military reality. A test of whether political objectives can overcome decades of mistrust. A test of whether ordinary people can find space between fear and conflict. The world is watching, but the people living it on both sides are the ones who stand to lose the most. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because in geopolitics, understanding the why is as important as knowing the what.